Okay, so get ready for a deep dive that really flips the script on prayer.
Oh, this is going to be good.
We're looking at a message from Pastor Chris Ayakalum's Your Love World event.
Okay.
And let me tell ya, he throws out the rule book on this one.
Really?
It's not about, like, sitting quietly hoping for the best.
Mm.
Pastor Chris is talking about prayer that makes waves, like actual change in the world kind of stuff.
Huh. So how does he back that up?
Yeah.
Connecting that to like what we read in the Bible.
That's what's so fascinating. He brings in these ancient stories about power, miracles and stuff.
Right.
And then he connects the dots to the stuff we face today.
Oh, I see.
He's saying the same spiritual principles are still in play, like the same power is available.
So it's kind of like a call to action then.
Totally. He actually challenges that, saying all we have is prayer.
Yeah.
He's like, if that's true, then you have everything you need.
Wow. Okay. I like that.
It's about realizing that prayer isn't some passive thing.
Right.
He points to the disciples. They were blown away by how effective Jesus' prayers were.
Wow.
They actually asked him to teach them how to pray like that.
Can you imagine? Seeing that firsthand.
Right.
You'd be like, sign me up for that class.
Exactly. And that's what Pastor Chris is getting at, that we can tap into that same power.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, he uses the story of Caleb from the Bible in Numbers.
Okay, Caleb, remind me about him again.
So God promised them this land, Hebron, right?
Right.
But there were these intimidating giants living there.
Oh, right.
And Caleb's like, we got this. God's on our side. Let's go.
He had that unwavering faith.
Exactly. And Pastor Chris says that's how we got to be.
Oh, I see.
Hmm.
So we got to identify the giants in our own lives.
Yes. What are those things that seem impossible to overcome? Fear, doubt, injustice in the world, whatever. And then we got to face them head on, just like Caleb.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But then he kind of veers into this whole other area.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Right, spiritual warfare. It's not exactly something you hear about every day.
I know, right? And to be honest, this is the part that really made me want to dig in.
Me too.
So tell me more about what he says about angels and demons. Like, where do they come into this?
Well, he starts by talking about how God assigned angels to oversee different nations.
Okay.
But he says that some of these angels, they got, I don't know, maybe a little too interested in earth, and they rebelled against God.
Okay, so how does angelic rebellion connect to these giants we were just talking about?
Well, that's where it gets really wild. Pastor Chris believes that these rebellious angels actually had children with human women.
Whoa.
Yeah, and those children, he says, were the giants.
Wow, I've never heard that one before. So where did demons fit into all of this?
Well, Pastor Chris says that when those giants eventually died,
Yeah.
their spirits, they were kind of stuck.
Oh.
Yeah, like they weren't fully angelic, but they weren't human anymore either. So they remained on earth as these kind of malevolent spiritual beings.
So he's saying they became what we now call demons.
Exactly. And he believes they're still around today, causing havoc.
Huh. It really makes you think about those old stories in a whole new way. So he's saying that this is still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. He's basically saying that this spiritual battle, this face-off between good and evil, is still going on.
Even in our modern world.
Especially in our modern world, he argues. He says that early Christians, they transformed the Roman world not just by, preaching,
Right.
but by actively battling against those demonic forces.
So he's saying that prayer is part of that battle.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And he's concerned that today, a lot of churches have lost sight of that they're more focused on rituals and traditions.
Instead of the power.
Exactly.
So he sees a link between what's going on in the world and the state of our spiritual fitness, would you say?
You could put it that way. He believes there's a direct connection.
That's a pretty intense thought.
It is. But the good news is, he also says we have more power than we realize to fight back.
Which brings us back to prayer as a form of action. Not just asking for stuff, but actually engaging in this spiritual battle.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. What does he mean by spiritual warfare, and how does that apply to us today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. It's easy to talk about biblical giants, but what does it look like to actually fight those giants in our modern world?
That's where things get really practical.
So when Pastor Chris says we need to be engaging in this spiritual warfare, what does he actually mean? Like, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, he gets pretty specific about it, actually.
Oh, does he?
He encourages people to pray against those, what he calls demonic forces, the ones he thinks are at work in our communities, like all over the world.
Huh. So not just praying for, like, our own personal stuff.
Right. He's talking about going beyond that. He says we need to pray for corrupt systems to be dismantled, for bad leaders to be removed from power.
Okay, so does he actually name names, like actual leaders and organizations?
He does mention the World Economic Forum,
Okay.
the WHO, the World Health Organization,
Right.
and Gavi.
Hmm.
He seems to see them as examples of what he calls these, like, evil empire.
Evil empires. Wow, he's making some pretty bold claims there.
He is. And he even suggests that they're losing power because of the prayers of believers.
So he's linking prayer directly to, like, real-world outcomes, political outcomes even.
Yeah, you could say that. And, it's important to remember that this is coming from his particular theological viewpoint.
Right, of course.
It might resonate with some people, but others might not jive with it at all, which is totally fine.
Absolutely. We're not here to tell anyone what to believe. But I do think that even if you don't necessarily share Pastor Chris's exact beliefs,
Yeah.
there's still some interesting things to think about here. Like
Sure.
the idea of facing our giants, remember that?
Absolutely.
Whether those giants are personal struggles or things happening in the world. That idea of recognizing those things that make us feel powerless, and then choosing to confront them.
Yeah, instead of letting them win.
Exactly. I think that's a message that can speak to everyone.
It's definitely about taking ownership, right?
It is taking ownership, taking action. It's about recognizing that we're not helpless bystanders. We can actually make a difference.
Right. We have more agency than we often realize.
Exactly. And so how do we tap into that? How do we actually take control, like he says?
Well, on a practical level,
Yeah.
he talks about getting involved in our communities,
Okay.
speaking out against injustice, supporting causes we believe in. But then he takes it a step further.
What do you mean?
He believes that while taking action is important,
Yeah.
our efforts are going to be way more effective if we combine that with prayer.
So it's a two-pronged approach then. Action in the physical world and prayer in the spiritual realm.
Exactly. It's about working on both levels,
Uh-huh.
And he uses this analogy of a two-pronged attack, like in a military campaign. He's saying, we got to weaken the enemy on both fronts, the seen and the unseen. And he really emphasizes that this power, it's available to everyone.
Okay, so then let's talk about the practical side of this prayer warfare. What does it look like in action?
Well, he encourages people to be very specific with their prayers,
Specific.
instead of just praying for general things like world peace.
Right.
He says to pray about specific issues. Like, if you're concerned about crime in your city, praise specifically against that.
So name it and pray against it.
Exactly. Identify those giants and address them head on.
It's almost like a more strategic, targeted approach to prayer. Like you're not just throwing prayers out there and hoping for the best.
Right, and I think that makes sense even outside of a religious context.
How so?
Well, if you think about it, when we set specific goals in our lives,
Yeah.
we tend to be more successful when we create a plan to achieve those goals, right?
That's true.
It's the same with prayer, at least according to Pastor Chris. It's about being focused, intentional, really believing that those prayers have the power to make a difference.
I can already hear some people listening and thinking, okay, but what if I'm not really a spiritual warfare kind of person?
Right.
Like, what if that whole concept just seems a little too, I don't know.
Up there.
Yeah, like a bit much.
Well, I think even then, there's still something really valuable in what Pastor Chris is saying.
Okay, how so?
Well, it's like this. He's talking about prayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at its core, it's about recognizing that we have a part to play,
Okay.
that we're not powerless.
Yeah.
Whether you believe in a literal spiritual battle or not, the idea of looking at the giants in your own life, the things that scare you, the things that seem impossible to change.
Yeah, we all have those.
Exactly. And choosing to confront those things, to work towards a better future, that's something everyone can get behind.
It's about taking action, taking responsibility.
Absolutely. And for Pastor Chris, prayer is part of that action. But even if you don't see it that way, just the act of identifying what you want to change in the world and deciding to do something about it, that's huge.
I love that. You're saying it's not about forcing anyone to believe a certain way. It's about
empowerment.
empowerment. I like that. So as we kind of wrap things up here, is there a final thought, a question, something you want to leave our listeners with today?
How about this? What if you truly believed that your actions, even the small ones, could make a difference? How would that change the way you live your life?
Ooh, that's a good one. A lot to chew on there.
There is, and that's what we're all about here, right? Getting you thinking, asking those big questions, and maybe even seeing things from a new perspective.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, keep seeking, keep questioning, and as always, keep diving deep.